Welcome to the TomorrowZone Catalyst Podcast. I'm your host, Deb Reuben, and this is part of our series called Spark to Shift, how smart leaders are navigating AI adoption. We're cranking up our curiosity. In each episode, we're talking with bold, visionary leaders. Each of our guests is at a different point in their AI journey, and they bring a unique perspective. From personal productivity to team empowerment to company leadership, they're transforming potential into progress. So if you're ready to step away from day to day and get into an exploration of what's possible, turning that possibility into reality, you're in the right place. So today's guest is Beth Bannerman. She is a communications strategist, ESG advisor, and board member for an AI sustainability company, and the host of the Planeteers podcast, where she spotlights women who are leading the charge for a cooler, more sustainable world. She brings a unique dual perspective. She's led communications through global financial crisis, tech transformation, and sustainability innovation. And she's also a screenwriter working on a sustainability themed feature film, which is so cool. We met at a virtual innovation event where I saw her speak in a panel on crisis communications, and I was just so impressed. So I reached out and we quickly bonded over our shared curiosity for the human side of innovation. Beth knows how to help organizations to shape stories that drive clarity, confidence, and action, even in complex, fast-changing spaces like AI. Today, we're going to explore how narrative, trust, and empathy are critical tools for leading AI adoption that sticks. Beth, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Deborah. It's so great to be here with you.
I'm so excited for this conversation. I mean, we could have went on forever and ever the last time we got together to chat. So I'm curious to see what happens here. You know, you have such an amazing and diverse background and so much depth. I'm curious what sparked your interest in AI, and how did storytelling or communication shape your perspective on it?
Well, I came to tech through journalism originally. So I started off as a newspaper reporter, and the internet took hold. Online news reporting became a disruptor in journalism. And I joined a group of executives from Dow Jones that were starting up a new online 24/7 news and information service. And this was focused on a number of vertical industries. And the idea was that we were creating online real-time news and analysis that was with a premium subscription going into corporations, into their intranet. And we were able to create customized news alerts and really drill down into what the audience was interested in learning. And at the time, we saw content. The tagline was content for commerce. So a well-informed business person would be able to take a competitive and advantageous position in whatever decision they were making because they knew more about what was going on and they had insightful analysis and data to back that up. And I think that was probably the seed where I realized that the speed of information was incredibly valuable. And then I started to think about just capitalism in general, that over time, I went from being a journalist with this online news and information service into corporate communications and, leading narratives for a large bank that was based in the UK, where I was leading multinational teams. And we were going through transitions after the financial collapse and had to kind of restore or reshape our identity and reclaim our nobility, like as if we had a noble purpose, as a bank, that we were uplifting the prosperity of communities through lending, for example, as opposed to just being this behemoth that was, just full of hubris and greed and bigger was better. But we understood that being a great big bank was impressive, but being a great big bank was even more impressive. So how do we get back to what's our purpose here on this planet? And then that transpired into a role as a head of communications for a biotechnology company where I was seeking a greater purpose and having like a better impact on the planet. And they were making sustainable chemistry. And so I got the opportunity to use narrative to help explain and translate how they were using machine learning at the time and a version of AI. It wasn't generative yet, where they were able to test molecules that were being genetically engineered this was yeast, essentially yeast strains, where they were genetically engineering these yeast strains to see if they were going to be scalable at an industrial level to create this sustainable chemistry. So they were using their own proprietary language called Thumper, actually, and they were using this technology to create a better sense of predictability. So again, doing analysis on which of these yeast strains was going to be able to survive at a large industrial scale level. That storytelling and using, talking about the technology and why it matters and how do we get there, and creating excitement around the impact of the technology instead of just, being excited about the technology itself, was really motivating for me. So kind of like, I don't know how you would describe that red thread, but I think, the word curious, you used that at the start of the show. I think that was probably my driving force, and continues to be my driving force in storytelling.
The other thing that I was hearing as a thread through your story, and it was getting me excited because this is one of the things I'm writing about in my forthcoming book, is the importance of constantly and continually reconnecting to purpose. And that came out in every part of your story. Like, you are really purpose driven, and that's so exciting to see. And I think, you shared that in the bank story, you shared that in the chemistry story, but I keep hearing that every time I talk with you. Curiosity and purpose is so strong.
What I'm finding is that when I talk to people at conferences or wherever, purpose always comes up, and not always from me first. I hear it, obviously we're living in challenging times, right? Like, pick a category, we're challenged by it, right? And I don't think that that's necessarily new. I think the challenges are new. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if they're more intense or not, but I know things are moving faster, right? But I hear purpose all the time. I think what I'm also recognizing and seeing now is that folks that talk about purpose only without talking about impact and outcomes have a harder time connecting with audiences that have real pressures, legitimate challenges that they're trying to solve for, be it financial or otherwise. So, me advising this AI sustainable business intelligence company is a real rewarding experience for me, because I'm working with these leaders who are kind of promoting the idea that if you know more about the single source supplier, being the planet, right? Water, energy, air, as in any supply chain, right? You have if nature is your single source supplier and you're relying on nature for your energy, your electricity, your water, et cetera, how do you mitigate that risk? How do you create a regenerative system in your company so that you are not extracting at a rate that is overshooting what the planet is able to produce in order for you to have sustainable growth for your organization? This is why business intelligence matters. You need to understand what your inputs are so that you can predict your outputs, and you need to protect those inputs. So how do you do that in a way that is regenerative and sustainable? And that's where I'm meeting some people who are really super curiosity people, right? Who are coming up with the really cool ideas of, let's get into areas like materials innovation. Instead of, I remember working in the Comcast building in Philadelphia on JFK Boulevard, and, it was a Leeds building, and it was really exciting. And, we had, floor to ceiling glass windows, and the shades came down when it got too hot in the summer. And I thought that was super cool. But now there's companies that are making glass that are kind of vacuum insulated, which respond to temperature variation indoor and outdoor. And they can regulate the temperature inside without maxing out air conditioning or having kind of this, what I say now is kind of like old school blinds that just automatically drop. It's just glass that actually shades automatically. It just, the who came up with that? So I love the idea of this what if question.
Yes.
What problems are we trying to solve? Forget about money, forget about resources in the ideation space, which is, I know you're an expert in this. And then think about like the opportunity of working within constraints of budgets and material availability. And, do we build it or do we buy it? Those types of questions. Yeah. And I think, working with teams that are actually like legitimately changing the world is something that is super exciting, and it's happening all over the place. I can't even keep up with some of the inventions that are coming up. Like New York Climate Week was last week, and climate tech. It's just crazy, it's exciting. I mean, there's a lot of doom and gloom, but there's a lot of excitement out there. But when they attach purpose to actual kind of material or financial outcomes or even impact, that's what gets me kind of excited, because that feels more like there's more traction there. We can get more momentum with investors.
But it's a chance to make a bigger, better future, and that's what gets people excited. So can you share a moment where communication was kind of a make or break thing for an AI related initiative or innovation effort?
Yeah, I was recently working with an AI company, and their challenge was, as they explained it to me, and I surveyed a number of internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, and I did a bunch of research to kind of test whether this was actually a thing. But in truth, it was. So what they found was that they were trying to tell what their company did to various audiences. Now, some audiences were tech, some were investors, some were employees, some were just general public. And they found that there was a moment when the telltale signs of disconnect were happening. People's eyes were glazing over. They started to shift in their seats. Mm-hmm. Their questions weren't very, thoughtful. There were more polite questions to keep the Q&A period going, as opposed to somebody who had actually had an insight during that panel and wanted to ask, and it sparked a thought. And so they were noticing that was happening in the telling of their story. And so I sat down with a number of them, and we just went through just a really creative exercise where I asked them to tell me what they did without using any technical jargon whatsoever.
Ooh, what was that like?
It was great, because we went right into the area of analogies, which I love, So, are we talking about a traffic system here? Are we talking about a coach here? And so, and stories came up like AI is like a coach. And, if you could say that, I am a couch potato and I have an elite coach, I am not going to become an Olympian just because I have an elite coach, AI being the elite coach. I have to learn how to, make use of that tool in order to improve my performance. And there was another analogy. AI is not gold. It is the pick to get to the gold, those types of things. And when we started to kind of like, spitball through those things, it became fun. And when you can play, which I know you had another guest on your podcast who I absolutely loved, who talked about the value of play and finding flow. And that's great, because then as a storyteller, we know every story has an arc. You have a world, and then something happens, the inciting incident happens, and then you have a new world, right? And then how do we navigate in this world? What do we really want in this new world? How do we get to that? And who do we need to bring with us in order to do it?
Yes.
What obstacles do we face? And the skeptics are really our best friend, because they are serving up the objections that we need to be able to think critically about our long-term impact. So that was another thing. Like, there was this resistance to talking about sustainability, for example, this AI company. And I thought, well, why is that? Let's ask ourselves, how would we answer that today? How do we want to answer it? What's it going to take to answer it in the way that we want to answer it? And then what can we say now about the direction that we're going? Like, just stay humble, just pay attention to what people care about, and then don't overshoot or mislead. And then just say where you are now at this point in time, and always reserve the right to evolve your story. So
That's
I think
key. That
kind
is
of
key.
releasing that pressure to be perfect and polished and unassailable is like, I think it was a weight off their shoulder. And in the way of telling a story without that pressure,
Mhm.
it's more engaging, and it's more believable, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's genuine,
Yeah.
because like so much is happening today. None of us have all the answers, and expecting yourself to know everything from the start is just crazy. So, one of the things that really caught my attention when I first heard you speak is the work that you had done with teams in high stakes situations, and I know you've worked in high stakes situations across finance, as you mentioned, biotech, and now AI. What are some of the mindset shifts that have helped you to guide teams through uncertainty?
Hmm. Well, I think you said it earlier, which is like avoid it, like forget about trying to know it all. So that's one thing. Have a learning mindset. We're all
Mm-hmm.
learning. We're all in this together. So I think that's one thing, and I think that would be really, really important. The other thing is going from certainty to humility, adaptive humility, constantly learning is one thing. I
Mm-hmm.
think also going from transactional in the way that we operate to more relational. And I think I had this conversation with my husband just the other day, which was like, I think the most valuable currency today is trust. And I know there was a book, Speed of Trust, years and years ago, I read it,
Mm-hmm.
but it still holds true to today. And I think if we are able to listen to each other and speak or write or communicate in a way that is fact-based and is addressing the need of who you're speaking to and does not pretend to be, to have all the answers or to be perfect, then I think you can earn trust pretty quickly. And if you continue to keep people updated and continue to communicate with them regularly, you're showing respect and you're showing that they deserve to know what's going on, whether it's your employees or your investors or regulators or whoever your stakeholders are. I think that's important as well. And then another thing I would say is a mind shift away from kind of stress testing and kicking the tires on ideas to see if it's good enough to
Mm-hmm.
more kind of scenario planning. So open your aperture up a bit to say, what would it take to have drinkable rivers is a question that one of the people on my podcast
Oh,
asked
that
me.
was a juicy question.
Okay, so what if that was the goal? I know that human beings, which is what I love about humans, is that we are creative problem solvers and we love a juicy question, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
give us, if that was the challenge, tell us what are the constraints? How do we do it? Where would we do it first? How could we prove that it works? How could we sustain it? Like we could easily do that. We could create a drinkable river. I know that we could, right?
Yeah.
But it would take time, it would take money, it would take genius,
Well, even
we could
just
do.
giving it the intentional space to think through that question.
Yes. Yes. That's
It's
it.
such a good one.
So scenario planning, I think, would be the other thing. And then maybe the last thing would be just the mind shift is really get out of silos. And
Ooh,
I know this is
yes.
old. I mean, but honestly, like what I'm finding is that there is no communications in an organization, for example, can't come in after the widget is built. And communications can't be created without the widget builders in the room. So, for example, when I was working on this narrative with this AI company, I said, "Can we say this?" And I said this to the CTO, and he was like, "Not today, but that's what we're working on." I said, "So, what are you working on now that's moving with the intent, as you say, to get to this point?" "Well, this is what we're doing. This is the exciting stuff we're finding, but these are the risks." I'm like, "Okay, so let's go check with legal and finance to determine whether or not we're able to say that. Because if we get out too far ahead of investor relations or the regulatory group or legal, then we might be causing ourselves some extra work from the storytelling perspective where we'd have to kind of maybe walk some things back. So you don't want to say too much too soon, but by getting the finance team involved and the legal team and governance, when you have trust and you have a relationship and you're across silos, you're saying, we want to say this. This is why we want to say it. This would be a differentiator. We think we can say it. We can almost say it. We can get close to say it. Can we say this? And they'll, noodle, come back. You can say this, but don't say another thing after that or whatever, So it's like, as long as you kind of work as a team, it's kind of like a moving net, like everybody's got to be part of the, linking their arms and telling this story and shaping the story.
So I just grabbed the sticky note I have on my screen. I don't know if you can read it, but it says, who else needs to be involved?
Yeah.
Because it's just a reminder, like that is one of the things that we practice all the time, because silos just kind of impede innovation. We need to get all those different voices in so that we can explore the boundaries of the real constraints, so that we can maybe tweak the question a little to say, how can we say this?
Yeah.
And so it just opens up new possibilities. So we're talking about AI and AI adoption and communication. So key. I'm curious, from your perspective as communications expert, what are you noticing about how leaders are or are not preparing people for AI related change?
I love that question. So I think the first thing is that the pace of technology is moving much faster than cultural shifts take. So I don't know that executives, even boards, so I'm talking to board members as well. So they're struggling right now, I think, with trying to absorb what are the impacts and opportunities of AI technology. What does it mean for their company? What does it mean for them? How are they going to use it? But then how do people feel about, what are the perspectives or viewpoints of the stakeholders around how we make those bets, how we make those choices and decisions? And so I think the cultural shift is moving much slower than the technology. And so let me give you an example. When a leader goes out and talks about efficiency gains, we're going to have saved so much time, so many, man hours, et cetera. There will be a winner and a loser in that sentence, right? And the speaker has to understand that the losers are just as important as the winners, because the losers can turn the winners against them, depending on how the winner's value system is, their belief system, right? So if I really believe in the planet, but I love efficiency, but the losers are saying, yeah, but we're sucking up all the energy and all the water of this community, and now we're taxing all these people. They're spending much more money on all these natural resources, and these big AI companies are getting tax subsidies from their government. It's so unfair. And you have a core belief or core value in equity and justice for the well-being of other humans. You might think, well, efficiency is great, but at the cost of, there's a trade-off for. And so I think the leader who is emotionally mature enough to be able to hold the duality that there will always be trade-offs and acknowledge what those trade-offs are right from the get-go, instead of hoping that nobody notices, is integrity. And I think that is what I think the board members and executives need to be thinking about right now, is how do we tell the story about the benefits of this while addressing, acknowledging, and validating people's fears for it. Like, you're going to take my job, you're going to take my electricity. AI is a threat to me for a whole host of reasons. And going in knowing that it is, and it is, right? So, but managing the tension between the two is something that's interesting. For example, I just recently spoke at the Holt Business School, and it was a bunch of, aspiring technologists and chief sustainability officers. This is what they wanted to do. And so my question to them was, why can't AI shrink its own footprint? Like, you guys are college students, you're the future, right? So help me figure out, why do we have data centers that use so much electricity and water? Are you kidding me? Like, remember the story that we were told when the iPhones came out in 2007, 2008? It was like, oh, the compute power in this little phone is the same amount of compute power that was required in the late 1960s that sent the astronauts to the moon, that required warehouses of boxes of servers. Surely in 2025, the servers are as big as they're ever going to be, and they're only going to get smaller, and they're only going to require less resources. But how, right? How? Now, there's some companies that are using water
working
loops,
on that,
right, to cool it. Yeah, right. So those are the questions that I think the exciting part is that it's a runway. It's an open runway. These are questions that definitely need to be solved because there's only so much water in the world, right? And, like it or not, believe it or not, the temperature of the planet is rising. And with rising temperatures comes more extreme weather. And with more extreme weather comes more food insecurity and disrupted supply chains, right? Because the ports are, have sunny day flooding and all these other things. Like these things are happening. So acknowledging like reality and solving for these problems, like reducing the use of fossil fuels and, regenerating energy and using water loops to cool our data servers. Like those are great problems to solve. First of all, it's good business, right? And secondly, it's the moral thing to do for 7 generations from now, for our grandkids and so on. Like that's our responsibility to take care of this one home that we all share. So I think that was motivating for the kids. It's like that is important. And anyway, that gets back to your original question, which is, what are executives and boards struggling with? I think it's about language and how do we frame challenges and how do we create and how do we frame these challenges as opportunities, but not in a disingenuous way. Like actually point out that there's really big problems to solve, exciting, good problems to solve. Yeah. And maybe AI can shrink its own footprint. Why not put that constraint on AI? How would you operate? And you know what I mean? And then interrogate it.
And it just keeps coming back to the power of curiosity and all of this, because throughout all of this, you're asking new and different questions that, given time and space, could lead to more impactful and better results. I love that whole thought process. I'm curious. So we've been talking about leadership and mindset, and but you also shared with me the first time that I met you that kind of a side project that you're working on, a creative outlet, and you're working on a screenplay. And I don't run into a lot of people that's what they're doing on the side for fun. So how does your creative writing work influence how you view transformation and systems change? Is there a connection there?
For sure. So thank you I love talking about, this is the fun part where I start to talk about, everyone has a passion project. Well, maybe everyone doesn't, but I do. I discovered it. And it's my place to get completely liberated in imagining a world that doesn't exist. And so with that, I have the freedom to be nonsensical in the questions that I ask, or what is possible. What are the rules of the characters? So, for example, I'm writing a feature film. It's an animation. So do the animals talk? Do the animals not talk? That's up to me as the writer to create that. I can do whatever I want in the story. And so I think that ability to be kind of unconstrained or unlimited in the way that I think about what a world could be is certainly helpful, that I bring back into the corporate space where I'm advising. And I just recently, over the weekend, I was privileged enough to attend a local film festival. And speaking I attended this masterclass by the director, John Chu. And John Chu directed a number of films, but most recently Wicked and the upcoming Wicked for Good, Wicked Part 2. And the way he talked about building a world, he said that to him, it wasn't his quote, but he was quoting someone else. He said, architecture is like frozen music. And I thought, that's like, let me digest what he just said there. It was so interesting the way that he perceived a set. And what he was saying was like, I need to have the set designers come in and create this imaginary world. And then I can think about how do the characters move in that space. So if this scene is about loneliness, what music do I need to convey that? What are the words? How do they need to be delivered? What lighting? Do we need negative space? Should we pull out some of the elements on the set to create that sense of loneliness? So it's really talking about a sense of feeling and emotion and creating a connection with the audience. And for me, if you think about what does that mean in terms of a corporate space, like how do we do that in the business world? For me, it's really about paying attention to the opportunity of empathy. So if you think about how people are feeling about AI, for example, or what have you, what is the feeling that you want to create? And then what words do I use? What words don't I use? How do I use my hands like I'm doing right now? Or am I more reserved? What energy level would be appropriate to convey a sense of understanding? If I'm going to be up there, you've seen this newscasters where they're like, okay, and so 5 people were just shot at this school. And now we go to weather. And you're like, that was abrupt, like that felt insensitive to me.
Yeah.
And so the delivery and the tone of voice, and I mean, it doesn't take, you don't need to be, some people get caught up in their job or in the deliverable and checking the box and delivering the speech. And they don't create the time and space, like you mentioned before, like you don't pause and read the room, and having that sense of empathy to create a sense of feeling is really important. But just, the general technical parts of creating a story and creating an arc and having a protagonist, the main character who's making the choices. What does the character want? Who's making choices and dealing with the consequences and having that friction and having that resistance is part of the story to get to the outcome. And then in the end of the story, the character either achieves its goal or does not achieve its goal. But the character certainly learns something about themselves through that journey itself. And so when, we're creating a narrative or we're working with teams to say, this is the journey that we're on, these are the headwinds we expect to face. There's always the knowns and then the unknowns, and then we don't know what we don't know. So be prepared for that. And that's having a dynamic stance, like a skier, like keep your knees bent, get ready for a mogul, right? And we got it together, right? Back to the linked arms kind of a thing. And so I think that just being able to communicate expectations, and it's going to be a bumpy ride. We're in it together. This is part of it. We're going to be learning about each other. Trust is the most important thing. Those types of, I think, universal ideas that we get from movies and TV and books all the time are understandable and comfortable and familiar with people. And so they're ready for it as long as they're not on their own. Our sense of belonging and wanting to be part of the village so we're safe. Having that sense of team, I think, is really important.
I can see how getting into the creative zone and working on your screenplay it's almost like a mind gym to stretch and strengthen your imagination, because when you talk about world building in terms of creativity and imagination, that is like next level thinking for stretching your own imagination of what could be, because it's so multidimensional. You're thinking about the story, you're thinking of empathy, the characters, the experiences, the music, like all different levels at the same time. And it is very much like the complexity that we face in any innovation or digital transformation type initiative. And I could see why, all of the questions that you ask are like so juicy and just spark your imagination to want to just go, oh, I just want to like go in a cave and think about that for a little bit. What leadership lesson do you wish more people understood? We're in this world where AI is coming at us from all sides. Things are moving really fast. What do you wish that more people understood about leading through AI adoption?
Questions are good. Questions are healthy. Encourage questions. Lots of questions. And care more about clarity than glamour. Care more about ensuring that, as you're telling the story of what you do, or in fact, as you're listening to others who you may admire or you may be learning from, ask questions yourself. So as a leader, you're fielding questions all the time, but make sure you're asking your own questions and that you don't lose your own spark. And it was great. I was talking to a CEO of an AI company just about a month or so ago. And I said to her that, the CEO of NVIDIA had made this comment that AI data centers are not a modern word. They're AI factories. That's what he said, right? And she said, is that true? So I loved that reaction, which is it true? If it is, why? If it isn't, why? Or can it be true and not true? Like, so is it a situational truth? And so she started to explore that. And she said, I see it. I know what he's saying, right? He's a manufacturer of chips, right? They're like dominating the world. I get it. But what if, and I'm like, okay, you've got me. Let's go on this journey together and explore that. And then it became a differentiated point of view that she had that was relevant and timely to the discourse that was happening at conferences, global conferences, and was picked up by the media. But she had a separate take on it. And that made her point of view interesting. And it was educated and informed because she has 30 years of experience in tech as an engineer as well. And I said to her, this is exactly the thought leadership that we're looking for when we're trying to figure out what's going on in AI from the people who are leading AI organizations. And when you are given a statement by another AI leader who you may not fully embrace, or at least, on the surface, your initial reaction is that true? And then you have your own take on it. That becomes an interesting conversation. And I said, this is where I wish more leaders were kind of asking questions out loud and maybe not even having the answer, but kind of like talking through how they think about things. I think having the confidence to be able to do that without, coming out and saying, this is a thing, instead of saying, but is it a thing? It could be a thing, because I think that's more relatable to us. And then we can kind of decide how we think about things. Are data centers factories? Does it matter? Who cares? Like, why is that important to even know? Is it important? That kind of thing.
I love it. Well, and it models the power of curiosity as well. I mean, rather than just taking everything at face value, leaning into questioning what you believe and why you believe it. That's a powerful process for any of us to take on. Beth, where can people learn more about you and the wonderful work that you're doing?
So first, LinkedIn. That's a great way of finding me. And on LinkedIn, I have a company page to my podcast, which is called the Planeteers Podcast. So thanks for mentioning that. We're now in season 2. So looking for guests for future shows. This is really featuring women who are in some way, shape, or form, CEOs to scientists, artists to activists, and everybody in between who is somehow connected to conservation. So really looking for conversations around innovation and solutions and kind of progressive thinking around how do we become better natural capitalists rather than just straight up capitalists. So that's LinkedIn, I think, is probably the best place to find me.
Awesome. This has been such a fun conversation, and I can't believe we're already to the top of our time together. But I wanted to wrap it up with this question, Beth. What do you wish someone had told you at the beginning?
Maybe slow down. That's something that I'm working on right now, which is, I think, I'll say my brain is wired to quickly get to the answer. And so, I've been conditioned to make assumptions, make judgments quickly, especially in high stakes situations. And I'm recognizing now that because the world is now way faster than it's ever been, that's actually not an advantage for me. That's a disadvantage. And instead, I think, go back to, rather than think about answers or solutions that might be immediately available or they might be immediately logical, go back to kind of my core principles of, understanding the implications of decisions. And so just taking a beat and saying, and again, like thinking about, okay, what are the 2 things that are going to happen as a result of taking this decision right now? Do I need to take the decision right now? And I think before, when I was trying to climbing the ladder and improving myself, I was doing a lot of that, trying to be efficient, trying to be fast, trying to be the person, the person that would get stuff done. And I still think that's important, but I think being busy is a lot different than being impactful. And so that's my personal lesson. And so slowing down, I wish someone could say, you can slow down a little bit if you want to. But slow is smooth, smooth is fast, as they say, I never understood that, but now I do.
Yeah. I had heard that before too. And now I find like that's the thing that we're talking about most often.
Really?
As we're working with teams is you need to take a pause. It's actually going to be an accelerator, but we have to stop and we have to think through the implications of what we're doing. So I love that you brought that up.
There was a Daniel Ek, I saw him speak at an event, and he said something like, at Spotify, he's the CEO of Spotify. At Spotify, we go slow because slow is cheap. And I thought that goes against everything I heard, like in the early 2000s, where fail fast, break things, those types of, learn, fail and learn. And he said, it is so much more important to bring people together, like the engineers, the different teams together, external stakeholders, et cetera, and collaborate around what is the North Star? Where are we going? And then what is the right next step? And I thought, wow, so that kind of marries with what, you were just saying, which is, take a beat. Just take a beat.
Yeah. And what a great message to end on. Beth, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To our listeners, I hope you took away some awesome wisdom nuggets from that conversation. And no, I did. I have 2 pages of notes here. So thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay curious and choose to make awesome happen.